Come closer, my child. Closer. That'll do. Hello, Internet. This is Olin from What I'm Listening To. Today, I'm here to talk about a genre that I feel like is a bit underappreciated, especially by folks who are probably around my age and younger. That genre I am talking about is jazz music. Jazz is one of those genres where I feel like a lot of folks either think it all just sounds the same and it goes unnoticed, or it's just so boring that it is completely tuned out by most. At one point in my life, I was completely like that. I just didn't really care much for jazz. It wasn't that I hated it, I just didn't really, listen to it as much. But when I was in college, I took a jazz appreciation class, and that exposed me to a lot of different recordings. And I didn't realize that amongst jazz, there's also subgenres and different approaches, much like rock music or pop music, just any kind of music. There were different types of jazz. And gradually I began to fall in love with the genre thanks to that class, and thanks to my dad, who's actually a jazz musician himself. He would show me recordings here and there. And fast forward to now, I have a bunch of jazz albums in my collection. I've shown them in vlogs before, and every so often I pick up a jazz record just because I love it. And so for this particular vlog, I have here a handful of some great jazz albums that I'm very excited to show, some of which are incredibly famous, and, well, let's see. Honestly, I think all of them are pretty famous, so let's just get right to it. The first album I have here, this is actually one of the first jazz albums I actually started to appreciate. This is John Coltrane's Blue Train. Dad is responsible for me liking this album. He one time put on Blue Train on our speakers back at home, and that beginning riff, the da-da-da-da-da, that stuck with me, and I could not get that out of my head. It was just so catchy and so interesting. And why I like this album so much is because, like I said before, jazz music was one of those genres where it all sounded the same to me, so nothing really stuck. But Blue Train was a song that did stick, and I think that was sort of the baby steps towards me starting to like the genre. And so I just would listen to this album over and over again in the background, and I love it. My dad has a copy of the CD, and since I've moved away from home, I felt like I needed to add it to my collection, so I have it here. This is the ultimate Blue Train, so it's an enhanced compact disc. I think that just means that there's extra video stuff on here, but I'm in it for the music, and I'm really, really excited to have this in my own personal collection. The next album I have here, I think I'll do this as a duo, but I have some Miles Davis, and this one right here, this is Birth of the Cool. When I was taking that jazz appreciation class that I mentioned earlier, I was exposed to the movement of jazz known as cool jazz, and I believe that this is the album responsible for cool jazz. We used to have to listen to this compilation CD and memorize the names of the tracks as well as who did them, and on that compilation was Drew, which is on this one. There was so many different styles of jazz and so many songs that I memorized, some of which I've completely forgotten, but there are definitely some that have stuck. Drew was one of them, and it's the reason why I have this album. I actually bought this album for my dad for Christmas, and once again, I didn't have a copy for myself, and I really wanted to own it. It's fantastic. It's old Miles, too. Miles has such a lengthy discography, but this is one of his older releases before he released his Monster, which I'll get to in a minute. I got the Rudy Van Gelder edition, which famous engineer. He engineered a lot of great jazz records, and his contributions to those have created jazz, and his style is just what makes us love some of the songs that are out there in the jazz world. Can't get enough of this album. Fantastic, absolutely worth checking out. So the other Miles Davis album I have, it's a bit obligatory, but it would not be a jazz vlog without it. I have Kinda Blue. This album is probably considered the best jazz album ever created. And that's saying a lot because there's a lot of jazz albums out there. But for anybody who's familiar with jazz music, they should know that this is the album that's a must-have and a must-hear. I grew to love this album when I was reading a lot of hard-boiled novels. I believe I was reading The Big Sleep, and I used to get really invested in the story by listening to jazz music, and this was the album that I typically had on repeat while reading. And not only are the tracks incredible, but the people who play on here are just equally as incredible. Bill Evans is on piano, John Coltrane's on here, Cannonball Adderley, Paul Chambers, just a fantastic cast and just such well-written, well-composed music. It's incredible. It's just absolutely incredible. Even if you don't like jazz music, this is an album that anyone who's a fan of music has to listen to. This appears on like all of the best albums of all time, and for good reason. Gotta check it out. It's so good if you haven't. It's just wonderful. The next album I have here is a Lee Morgan Greatest Hits. Dad showed me one of the songs on this album, I believe it is Ciora, and he described it as the tenor and the alto and the trumpet all harmonizing together just had this amazing crisp sound. And so when he played me that song, that made me inspired to go out and get some of Lee's work. Quite frankly, I didn't know where to start, so I just got a best of just because it had Ciora on it, and it also had The Sidewinder, which is another song that I would hear frequently. Once again, another mega talented musician who unfortunately is no longer with us. I believe he was killed when he was in his 20s, which is so incredibly sad. But a lot of jazz musicians spoke very highly of his work. I believe Miles and John Coltrane said great things on here, and he just, it's just so sad to hear such a talented person having passed so soon. So his legacy lives on, and his recordings are so good. There's a lot of complexity to his harmonies, but he just pulls it off so nicely, and he's definitely worth listening to. Alright, next up here, I have talked about this man a lot in past vlogs. I have a Chet Baker album. This is his mega famous Chet Baker Sings. Shamefully, I have listened to a lot of Chet's albums, but I never have listened to any of his vocal albums. When I was getting into jazz, I wasn't entirely into vocal jazz. I was more into the kind of warm sound of, the trumpets, the saxophone, just all of that, and I didn't want to be distracted by vocals. But I've always known about this album, and I've known how legendary it was, and so it wasn't until just recently that I'd been on the hunt for it, and I'd gone to Amoeba a lot to see if they had a copy, and one day they finally had it, and I just decided I gotta get this, I gotta hear for myself. And to be honest, I don't know why I was so against vocal jazz, because after I heard this, it definitely changed my perspective on it. Talk about warm sounding music. This is a very, very warm record, and even though it was in the middle of summer, when I first listened to it, I got a huge Christmas vibe out of it. Typically, I listen to Vince Guaraldi when it's the holiday season, specifically the Charlie Brown Christmas soundtrack, but I think I'm going to have to incorporate this into my holiday playlist, because there is just such a, nice sit by the fire and relax kind of vibe to it. Chet was an amazing musician. He's no longer with us either, but his legend lives on. This is a fine record, and I'm going to now have to listen to more of his vocal work, because there's a lot out there.
This helpless haze I'm in, I've really in love before.
Speaking of Vince Guaraldi, I have some vinyl here, and more specifically, I have a Vince Guaraldi and Bola Sette album. My coworker had a bunch of records that she was selling, and before she took them to Amoeba, she was saying, you can have a peek through them and just pick out what you'd like. And amongst the bunch was this one. Dad had gotten this record on CD a while back, and I love Vince Guaraldi, as I've talked about. I listened to the Charlie Brown soundtrack, but I also really, really like Bola Sette. His guitar work he does is just beautiful. So when you have two big guys like that performing together, you know it's going to be a good record. And considering that I feel like jazz music sounds best when you listen to it on vinyl, I had to snag this one. I'm sure it will feature the nice jazz trio music that Vince makes, with the addition of Bola Sette's amazing guitar work, Latin guitar work for that matter. It gotta be good. I'm excited to spin this. I'll probably spin this after I'm done recording here, so I'm looking forward to having this in my collection. And the last jazz record I have here, more vinyl. This is Tjader's Soul Sauce. I can guarantee that at some point in your life you have heard Soul Sauce. And you may not know it's Soul Sauce, you might know it as the song Wachiwada. It's got this iconic vibraphone riff that just starts the song out and then everyone chants Wachiwada. I was in elementary school, and I remember very vividly there was this jazz band that showed up, and we had like a mini concert in the cafeteria, and they played this song, and ever since I heard it, it stuck with me. My dad's jazz band would do a cover of it, and I would just hear it all over the place, but it wasn't until just recently did I know that it was called Soul Sauce, let alone that it was by Tjader. This is yet another record that my coworker was going to sell, and I snatched it because I just needed to own it on vinyl and just say that I have some Tjader in my collection. Another wonderful Latin jazz composer. Dad talks about this guy all the time. I'm just thrilled to have a physical copy of it, and I'm gonna probably spin this one after I spin the Vince Guaraldi record, so love it. This is Soul Sauce. Definitely worth a listen. Okay, Internet, that does it for me. Hey, if you have any music that you want to recommend, albums, bands, whatever, leave a comment down below. If I like it, I will probably feature it in a vlog. But until then, this is Olin from What I'm Listening To, signing out. Goodbye.